Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 4 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Chicago Blackhawks, in which the Sharks have lost 5-2. Now, just yesterday, I posited that, maybe in an optimistic sort of way, the Sharks lost those first 3 games because they were just against teams that were too good for them. The Nashville Predators, a pretty decent team, were making the playoffs last year. The Carolina Hurricanes, a very good team. I mentioned that they were probably like top 7 or top 8 in the NHL as a whole, so that maybe the Sharks are better than what we've seen through the first 3 games, and that they're above some of the worst teams in the league. But we come here tonight where they're against the Chicago Blackhawks, and this is not me trying to be mean or anything, but the Blackhawks are bad. They are actively trying to rebuild, and that's not just because I look at their roster, clearly they're attempting to lose. The organization literally announced that this season was going to be a rebuilding season, and the Blackhawks were looking to be stronger, future down the line type of moment. And the Blackhawks made multiple sort of fire sale type of moves this past offseason to get rid of pretty much most of their good players that they at the very least could get rid of, besides the massive contracts of players like Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. So the Blackhawks are expected to be a bottom 5 team, if not a bottom 3 team, if not literally the worst team in the league. And yet the Sharks come in here today and lose by probably the most embarrassing score thus far of the year, by a score 5-2. And what makes this even worse is that the Sharks scored the first 2 goals of this game. In the first period, the Sharks started off the first 11 minutes or so without a shot, but once they finally got a shot on net, the floodgates kind of opened, and the Sharks were very dominant for the remainder of that first period and added not 1 but 2 goals onto the board. They got one from Nico Sturm as well as one from Logan Couture, then it got changed to Erik Karlsson, and so the Sharks were leading by 2 at the end of the first period, and it seemed as though, okay, the Sharks are bad, but they're not as bad, they're not at the level of the Chicago Blackhawks. And yet in the second period, things completely turned around. Jonathan Toews made it 2-1, and then not 1 but 2 shorthanded goals scored on back-to-back power plays for the San Jose Sharks to give the Blackhawks a 3-2 lead going into the third period. Would the Sharks rebound? Would they show some sort of fight in that final 20 minutes? Nope. They gave up 2 more goals to complete a 5 unanswered goal situation here and drop this game 5-2. They still remain at 0 points, 0-4 on the year, with the most games played in the NHL, at least tied for that mark. Pretty kind of embarrassing, you could say. Now, on the other hand, this was kind of a perspective given from a Sharks winning type of standpoint, from what the Sharks players and the Sharks management and coaching are likely hoping for. But I know that there are a lot of people, potentially the majority of the people who are watching this video, who actually want the Sharks to lose games. And in that case, this was actually a pretty big win/loss for the San Jose Sharks. By the end of the season, the Sharks want to, in this sort of tanking type of view, they want to have the lowest possible finish in the standings. And by the end of the season, they should be competing with the Chicago Blackhawks for a particular spot for the best odds in the draft lottery. And so this one is essentially the opposite of what a 4-point game usually implies. Usually a 4-point game is, well, you get the 2 points and you prevent your rival from moving up by 2 points. But it is the opposite type of situation where the Sharks avoided the 2 points and got their losing rival, I guess, type of situation, the Blackhawks, and gave them 2 points instead. So in that case, in that point of view, the Sharks, this was a pretty successful game for them and a pretty important one in the tank race for the bottom for the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. Moving on to the players to talk about, we of course have Meier, Hertl, and Cunnin leading the way as the Sharks' first line, and this line did get some good chances this game. That much is absolutely true, but it doesn't necessarily change the fact that Meier and Hertl have been pretty disappointing thus far this season. It was obvious that the Sharks were not going to have a good offensive output this year because their offensive output last year was bad, and if anything, their sort of forward unit plus defensive unit is literally worse offensively because multiple side grades were made at forward with players like Lindblom and Cunnin replacing others like Dahlin and Balcers. But on the defensive side of things, they lost Brent Burns, and got nobody to make up for him. And so the Sharks were probably going to be at best side grade offensively, which is still bad and probably worse. But having said that, I was still expecting Meier and Hertl to, at the very least, every couple of games be able to get a couple points here or there to maybe make something exciting for the San Jose Sharks. But even they are not able to generate anything. The San Jose Sharks, they're just, when they're not getting from those top two players, Meier and Hertl, they're not going to get it from pretty much anyone. And you could say the argument, well, the other team knows that there's no one else dangerous on the Sharks, so they just focus all of their attention on shutting down Meier and Hertl. But that was exactly the case last season as well, and yet they still managed to perform and get points. Timo Meier was almost a point-per-game player last season, and yet this year it is pretty much crickets. It's of course very early on, just 4 games in, but it's not a very good sign, especially for Tomas Hertl, who is on the first year of a massive over $8 million contract. When it comes to Timo Meier, he's in a contract year, so him performing poorly is actually driving his value downwards at this point. But when it comes to Hertl, you're locked in for 8 years, and it's not a very good start to it. When it comes to the second line, it is still the trio of Labanc, Couture, and Lorentz, and at the very least, they were better than what they were last game, but honestly, that is not saying much. The Sharks' last game were against, like I said, a very top team in the league, the Carolina Hurricanes, and so the team just got absolutely dominated. And here tonight, even though that the Sharks lost 5-2, they were still against a Blackhawks team that is not good, and so the Sharks' top lines, maybe most of their lines, were actually still able to generate some decent zone time, some decent shot attempts. But honestly, in terms of actual dangerous opportunities to score, there really wasn't much. The Couture line did get that second goal there, the Carlson goal that put the Sharks ahead by 2-0, but otherwise there really wasn't much doing. On the third line, I talked about them having slightly improved last game against the Hurricanes with this Lindblom, Bonino, and Nieto trio, and there's still flashes of some of these players being okay. Bonino had, I think, a decent offensive shift at one point in the first period, and Nieto the same thing. Lindblom has been completely invisible pretty much every single game he has played thus far for the San Jose Sharks this season, but the third line is something that seems to be stuck in stone because the Sharks refuse to make any roster moves past just swapping out fourth line forwards, which does bring me to the fourth line here. The Sharks made the pivotal, important, huge roster move prior to this game of swapping Gadjevich into the lineup over Noah Gregor. I know this was a move that was so huge. I really thought it was going to be the absolute game changer, completely turn the season around for the San Jose Sharks, to get Jonah Gadjevich, back into the lineup to play another 9 minutes of ice time and take the terrible Noah Gregor out of the lineup. Ooh, he's so bad. We got to get rid of Noah Gregor. And the fourth line, generally, it was a decent game, I guess. Nico Sturm, of course, did score a goal, and I talked about them and I praised them in the previous one against the Carolina Hurricanes, but the fact of the matter is, and this seems to be something that David Quinn does not understand, just based on these changes that he continuously makes onto the fourth line, this makes no difference. The fourth line is a situation where, if you're trying to edge out that one particular advantage at the top level, your fourth line being better than the other team's fourth line is sort of a bigger deal. The Colorado Avalanche going up against the Tampa Bay Lightning, both those teams absolute powerhouses. Maybe you can then go down to the fourth line and say, okay, whose fourth line is going to have better shifts? Whose fourth line is not going to be a liability defensively when facing up against Stamkos and Kucherov, or McKinnon and Rantanen? But when you're the San Jose Sharks and you're not scoring any goals, so your top six not performing, your defense is awful, your goaltenders aren't necessarily playing super well, coming up and saying, well, at least the Sharks' fourth line is doing something, is not accomplishing anything for the San Jose Sharks. And yet I'm sure by the next game that the Sharks do play, they're going to say, what if we swap out Svechnikov for Noah Gregor this game? That's the game-winning play. And, the cycle will continue. On the defensive side of things, I did mention pretty significantly Erik Karlsson. He was pretty much the major talking point of my last review, talking about how he seemingly made some sort of change to his game through those first 3 games. Well, we did get a return to form for Erik Karlsson. Maybe he actually watched my Carolina Hurricanes review. Actually, I won't even say maybe, he definitely did watch my Carolina Hurricanes review, because we did absolutely see the Erik Karlsson of old. take that as a good thing, but also as a bad thing, because the 2 goals that the Sharks actually scored in this game were pretty much entirely Erik Karlsson based. He made a beautiful pass. He essentially froze all of the Chicago Blackhawks defenders on the Nico Sturm goal, and then a very nice sort of play. Yes, you could say, well, it deflected off of the skate of Seth Jones, and he clearly wasn't planning for that, but he was obviously aiming for the stick of Logan Couture, so it was still a very nice thought-up play from Erik Karlsson. So definitely 2 positives there, and something that we weren't seeing in those first 3 games. But on the other side of things, we got also the bad side of Erik Karlsson, which is those major mistakes on these 2 shorthanded goals. In particular, Karlsson just looked completely lost. The first one, he was playing against a 2-on-1 sort of shorthanded, but not a classic 2-on-1 where one player's on the left, one player's on the right, and they're going to pass between them. This was like a down-low type of 2-on-1 that Erik Karlsson just completely frozen, just seemed completely lost in what to do, and hoping that the puck would make its way to his stick and he'd be able to go back the other way. And on the second shorthanded one, this one wasn't entirely Erik Karlsson's fault, but both him and LeBanc go below the goal line to chase after the puck carrier, and then there's Logan Couture standing next to the net, also doing his best Erik Karlsson impression, completely frozen. I mean, the fact that the Sharks had 3 players back in the defensive zone on a power play, and yet they still let a Chicago Blackhawks player all alone in front of the net, is a testament to how poorly they defended shorthanded, but that's not anything new. I mean, they were very, very bad defending the shorthanded breaks last season, and it seems as though nothing has really changed. David Quinn honestly had a very smart post-game quote about this, which was essentially that the Sharks did not play, they didn't play good hockey anymore. Once they were on the power play, they played power play hockey, which is just, offense 100% of the time. Let's try and get the puck back as soon as possible. So you start chasing the puck carrier, and that's when you get into trouble. And that was really the major reason why the Sharks ended up losing this game. And so when it comes to Erik Karlsson, it was nice to see a return to form on the both good and bad side of things, because of the fact that it still at the very least got the Sharks 2 goals in this game, 2 goals that they otherwise wouldn't have had if Erik Karlsson was playing like he did in the first 3 games. So I honestly can't be too mad. The only other defenseman who I do want to mention here, because otherwise nobody actually sticks out particularly well, would be Shemek. And the major thing that I do want to point out when it comes to Shemek is not him on the defensive side, but at the very least, he seems to be the one defenseman, besides Karlsson, of course, who seems to be really jumping into the play aggressively. Shemek had multiple times, especially in the first period, where he's coming into the play very, very down low, which is somewhat unexpected for a player like Radim Shemek, obviously known to be much more of a defensive guy, but he seems to have taken the sort of jump into the play type of message that David Quinn seems to be giving these defensemen to heart, and he really seems to be jumping into it. So I am kind of appreciative of that, even though it's not really leading to anything, because sadly, Shemek is just not really offensively gifted. And then when it comes to the goaltending here, it was not a particularly good game from Capo Kakinen, to say the least. We saw in the previous one that Reimer was just, doing his damnedest to try and really get the San Jose Sharks the 2 points against the Hurricanes, and just barely couldn't hold on, but definitely not his fault at all that the Sharks ended up losing 2-1. And while tonight, I won't necessarily say that Kakinen was the reason that the San Jose Sharks lost, but there were a lot of opportunities that the Blackhawks got that Kakinen could have made the save on, but just really couldn't come up with it, especially in that third period. You could say maybe he should have had the one by Radish. Maybe you could say that he could have had that Jonathan Taves one as well. Maybe one of the shorthanded goals he could have been able to make the save on, and the Sharks could have been a bit more competitive in this one. But in the end, the Sharks didn't play particularly well against one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the league, so you can't really say much. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Tuesday, and we'll see if they can continue this losing streak and go 0-5, or if they will finally get on the board. Class dismissed.